Here we go again on the 13th of May, 2021, 2022. I might as well start doing 7 days a week shows. Nuclear doesn't take a day off. Why should I? Are you ready for this headline? A community with about 20% of the village is going to be open, but the other 80% of the village is too radioactive to walk in, which means you can't breathe the air. Now, of course, radiation doesn't fly around looking for a community. It blankets everything, and the community is somewhere in amongst that. So it's not just, it can't be just 20, so it's 20% of the community in 100 square miles. You're surrounded, say, by 100 square miles of man-made radiation, but 20% of the community. I know this sounds like, no, that can't be true, but it actually is. Hello, everybody. Colette, hi, Colette. Port Angeles, hi, and Dana Nasana. And it's just such a messed up story, isn't it? Evacuation order. Now, when you say may be lifted, just that's the media trying to be human, right? But it's actually 6% of the community, not 20%. It just gets even weirder. That's the nuclear industry for you. Now, this is a picture of that community. I'm not sure what year this is. And to give you a context of how far away is this from the nuclear power plant, you can see the scale in the bottom right-hand corner is 10 kilometers. 10 kilometers. I'll just move it out of the way to kind of wrap your freaking mind around this. So let's see. The top of the chair and the side of my head right here is 10 kilometers. I know, Dana, you got a big head, Dana. I know, right? So 10 kilometers is right here. Hang on, let's do this again. 10 kilometers right there by that mountain. Put me there. That's another, that's 25 kilometers. It's just, there's evil, but nuclear displaces the traditional evil. Most people associate evil with murderers or crimes or whatever the case may be. But there's actually nothing on the planet can touch the nuclear industry when it comes to actual evilness. I don't think evilness does it a good. Difficult to tell the truth to someone. Now you see this under, if you follow me at all, you'll notice a lot of the stories, you'll say they're wearing radiation protective clothing up in that top left-hand picture. By the way, that picture, to get the rights to it, is $545. So there's some really unscrupulous people on this planet. And they're wearing paper suits. These are paper suits. These are not radiation protective clothing. What's the point to having media? Media doesn't say, it's a little shady. Only 20% of the community is open. In part of Fukushima's, all of Fukushima's a difficult to return zone. Because what they're doing, so communities are spotted, right? And there's all kinds of them that were off limit or incredibly radioactive. So they clean up the community, not necessarily clean it up, but they attempt to. Not academics or scientists or something like this, or universities or nuclear corporations, but homeless and victims of society. Just trying to, it just doesn't seem real. Nobody can be this evil. But we're talking about the Japanese, and we're talking about the nuclear industry. So when it comes to the nuclear industry, there's no such thing as evil. There is nothing they won't do to you. And like what I mean by do to you is harm you. There's nothing they won't contemplate when it comes to harming you. Officials in Japan, officially nuts in Japan plan to lift an evacuation order for part of an area designated as a difficult to return zone. Now, the whole bloody place is a difficult to return zone. They clean up a little tiny, and saying clean up is just, it's ludicrous to suggest it, because imagine you had a big forest fire, like a nasty one, and you go in and you clean up a little patch. And the minute the wind blows, what's going to happen to that patch? All the soot and everything is going to fill up that patch, right? And how often is it that the wind doesn't blow? You know what I mean? To the high radiation levels, not low level, but high radiation. It's just, I'm reading this story and I'm like, man, it's Friday. It's supposed to be my day off. I don't think I'm going to take a day off anymore. What's the point? If we had a few people out there that were talking about the subject and trying to hold the industry accountable, I still probably can't justify taking a day off, right? Because we don't know. It's not fair, I don't think, to leave these people without a voice, which covers 20% of Katsurao Village. But in the next paragraph, it's about 6% of that district. 20% of the village, 6% of the district. Potatoes. They aim to lift the order in about 6% of the district that has received preferential treatment. This is absurdness, of course, because we're not talking about nuclear scientists or nuclear academics or nuclear universities or nuclear corporations or, you know, these types of people cleaning it up and certifying it, because of course you can't. You can't decontaminate it without, you got to decontaminate the whole country. And you can't do that because this is assimilated into, it becomes radioactive pollen, for goodness sakes. And in other words, it's sucked up in all of the plants and leaves and litter and everything else. Decontamination work and infrastructure projects. Again, like it's around 25 kilometers, give or take a couple, from an actual event. This is not a meltdown. This is an event. Chernobyl was a meltdown. This is absurdness times infinity of madness. Lift the order in about 6% of the district, and it's just, radiation doesn't work this way, okay? You got to drive, and on top of that, you got to drive through a nuclear wasteland to get to your 6%. But you're not allowed to cross the street. You're not allowed to stop when you go into town. You got to go right to that little spot. But you can't stop the radiation from migrating, and you can't stop the airborne radiation. If the community is so radioactive, you got to evacuate it, then everything is radioactive, including the air. And like, what defines us as humans is that it's basically called a moral compass. And if you don't got a moral compass, then you don't meet the definition of a human. And this is why sometimes I'll wig out on the nuclear industry, because they've crossed every line that humanity's drawn as reasonable. Sources say, of course, who's the source? Well, we can't tell you that. A briefing for the victims about the results of rebuilding work is scheduled for Sunday. Again, the sources without saying, and then says officials. So it's not officials, it's sources. So, officials from the central and prefectural government, who will probably dig up your dead child if they die and rape them. It would be the first case in which people will be able to return to their homes in a nuclear waste zone. I'm flabbergasted. Should people in the nuclear industry have to get their DNA checked to make sure they're actual humans? Because how can you trick and deceive and manipulate people to go into a nuclear wasteland? You can't clean up the forest, which means every time it rains, everything's immediately covered in more radiation. I'm at a loss of how their thinking works. Is there actual thinking involved in what they do? Did the United Nations lapdog, the International Atomic Energy Agency, go in and inspect that? Of course not. How come? Well, they're not going into a nuclear wasteland. They're way too evil to be that stupid. I'll give you an idea how crazy this whole story is. And I mean, let me see. Right, so like, hi Susie. We got a poll that hopefully translates the dilemma that we're talking about. Should people go back to a town where 80% of it is too radioactive to live? So if they had done that particular headline, so if it said, if the headline had said, should people go back to a community where 80% of it is too radioactive to live, then how can you... Imagine that you're a journalist working for whatever you want to call this garbage media. I can't come up with a proper descriptive without being extremely vulgar, because it enrages me, and like, it's just so much evilness. Sometimes it just shocks my whole soul. It breaks my soul. On top of that, it wrecks my concept of humanity. So radiation forecast withheld by the government and the nuclear industry and the International Atomic Energy Agency. Obviously, it can't just be one of them. It has to be all of them. So therefore, it's time to get rid of the International Atomic Energy Agency, obviously, and the nuclear regulatory agencies, obviously, and your universities and your medias. And that's kind of depressing, because now you have no sources, official sources, that you can any longer trust. And so that trust now is permanently, if you're smart, and smart being if you can tie your own shoes. Tokyo drinking water is unsafe for infants, which meant that the pipes are now radioactive, the sinks are radioactive, the washers are radioactive, the dryers are radioactive, the bathtub is radioactive, the kitchen sink and the bathroom sinks are radioactive. Your dishes now, because you washed it in radioactive water, are radioactive. Your pots and pans are radioactive. Your laundry is radioactive because it was cross-contaminated. But it wasn't just through the water. This happened, the water is contaminated because of a massive, continuous, perpetual plume that you can't see or smell or hear or taste or touch or feel or anything has captured your country. Radiation forecasts can by no means be released to the public on March the 15th. So in other words, don't shelter, you don't have a chance to protect yourself. The significance of it is just terrifying, and the betrayal is just horrific. The kind of betrayal we're talking about that's the end of trust for any agency, for any universities, for any medias, for any officials, for any professors, for any academics. You're being extremely complacent if you trust these crazy betrayals. These people have betrayed every... Tokyo's samples of radioactivity levels, Tokyo, 220 kilometers away, had radioactivity levels higher than Chernobyl, and that's a very, very high level of contaminations as far south as Tokyo, but it's all the way up to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And of course, they're built on bomb craters, for goodness sakes, which is your first clue the nuclear industry it's a genocide, a death cult. Danger readings in Tokyo, radiation levels that triggered an evacuation, 17 times the recommended level, which is artificially inflated in increments over decades already. More contaminated than areas in the exclusion zone. 19.8 microsieverts per hour in the Tokyo area is 200 times the normal level, and the incineration of radioactive debris is suspected. Well, you need to evacuate it permanently and immediately, or there's going to be permanent harm to you and your loved ones. And in Tokyo, of course, and surrounding communities, the metropolitan is 36 million people. And you don't count, because you're 220 kilometers away from the actual meltdown, microsieverts is not how you're supposed to count that. You're supposed to count it in atomic decays. You're talking about many millions of atoms per square meter. So by calling it microsieverts, that's the deception. That's an unforgivable betrayal, and it's untenable. It's outrageous murder is what it is, on a scale that we don't have nothing we can compare it to, because it's a slow mass kill. And hence the reason the coronavirus was to cover up a lot of this. That's the official cover story for radioactive fallout, was the coronavirus, because the radioactive fallout was worldwide. And we expect to see another episode like the coronavirus, because the die-offs are happening and they need to account for the statistics. So they need Russia to release the pathogens, or somebody else to release a virus or biological weapon, to really account for what's happening and as it happens. Japan government gave... Now, speedy radiation forecast was a model system that Japan captured regulatory at that agency. They created over 5,500 of them in the first month, by the way, of radioactive fallout from data. It's paid for by the communities and the citizens to protect them in case of a meltdown, because they had 54 reactors. And of course, all that equipment, all these people that are trained to protect you, done the opposite when they finally had the accident. They locked you in to the danger zone. So imagine if you had 10 criminals chasing you with machetes, and there's a police station, and you're running towards the police station, and 5 police officers comes out with AK-47s, grabs the door, runs inside and locks it. And you run up and you're banging on the door, and they're like, no, too bad, man. That's too bad. It's tough luck. Because that's what the nuclear industry done to everybody on this planet. And they knew that when they built these things. Swanee D asked a question today in the comments section, was that were nuclear power plants built to produce energy or for something else? Well, they're surrounded by farms should be your first clue. These are disease factories. They're hemorrhaging radiation. Particularly once you started putting fuel in the fuel pool, you can kiss your planet goodbye. Government hid the radiation simulation because it was bad. Very, very bad. Japan professor shows serious contamination over a wide area. France says Japan has lost control and the French should leave the country. Not Fukushima and not Chiba, not Tokyo, but leave the country. Swiss embassy evacuated Tokyo, which is 220 kilometers away. So when they talk about iodine, you can't have iodine without 1,000 other fission products. The reactors don't run on iodine. And the biggest byproduct of nuclear accidents, if that's being employed, is the curium isotopes. And curium isotopes need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for plutonium. Plutonium is much more dangerous than iodine. Not that iodine is not dangerous, but once you have that in your tap water, that's forever. Because the idea of telling you Iodine-131, we've seen this throughout history, is to confuse you. Oh, it's got an 8-day half-life. The crazies are quick to come out in the media and try to convince you. And so the average person thinks a half-life is half. It's not. There's 10 half-lives. And you can't have iodine without infinite more of uranium, plutonium, curium, strontium, americium, plutonium, these very hot particles. Tokyo had 230,000 becquerels per square meter. Again, when you use cesium and iodine, it's designed to confuse you. It's 100% meant to lie to you. And it's 1,000,000,000% meant to trick you and deceive you. Being to harm you. To stop you from getting out of harm's way. So at what point are you going to take your planet back? You're going to have to think about this. This is not a game. This stuff is for keeps. It sequesters in your muscles, your organs, and your bones, and it harms you instantly and permanently. Your body attacks it. Let's keep it rolling here. A map of radioactive clouds shows threat to the United States West Coast. And when they claim people were working at the plant trying to solve, or like the so-called Fukushima 50, they weren't there. They had to abandon the plant. Even helicopters couldn't go near it. So this community and other communities in similar distances, 5.5 million becquerels a kilogram. You have to multiply that by around 64 to get a square meter, the size of your coffee table. These are terrifying numbers. 5 million becquerels, no decontamination. We can't eat the food there, but we're forced to live here. And that really should tell you everything you need to know about nuclear. So then the question is, should people go back to a town where 80% is too radioactive to live? And the answer is obviously no. People shouldn't be there trying to clean it up. It's too dangerous. Once you evacuate it, that means it's too dangerous to return to, not just for the people that used to live there, but for the poor victims that they're going to trick to go in there and pick up bags of Like picking up bags of radiation is not something a human is supposed to be doing. And wearing a paper suit can't protect you. I'm just going to flash through a bunch of headlines. It's just going to be a short video compared to my average video. I just wanted to put out enough information that you got to fight back, folks. Look, if you fought back, they wouldn't be doing what they're doing. They couldn't get away with it. They're only getting away with it because the world sits in silence. That's the only reason they're doing what they're doing. And what's the point of sitting in silence? There's nothing to be gained from it. 10 million becquerels a kilogram, you got to multiply that by 64 to get a square meter in Minima Soma, where they're growing food and shipping it worldwide. 20 million becquerels a kilogram, you got to multiply that around 64 to get what a square meter would be. This is absurd numbers. We don't have any references pre-Fukushima for this kind of numbers. These are catastrophic numbers to all species and everything with replicating cells. 1 million becquerels a kilogram, which is 64 million of square meter at a school after being decontaminated. And the children are there the next day. 64 million becquerels of just gamma. They're not acknowledging alphas, neutrons, and betas. Japan is burning debris 10 miles from a nuclear wasteland. All 10 children tested in a city 60 kilometers away have radioactive urine. 70% of the children in Kanto, which is part of Tokyo, radioactive. And now they're only acknowledging again gamma, and this is just absurd. A Tokyo professor, radiation detected in the urine of infants, but would have no effect on the bodies. This is the problem with professors. They're the first ones to cut your throat. That's their actual job. They can't get the job unless they're so dysfunctional, they'll cut everybody's throat so they can molest your children in the school. If you're distributing bottled water because your drinking water is unsafe, it's permanent. You're supposed to abandon your community, and that included Tokyo. Homes are significantly contaminated in Tokyo. Radioactive dust in Tokyo during the fog at 4,000 becquerels a kilogram of just gamma, again only acknowledging gamma. Again, in this story, only acknowledging gamma emitters, which is a cesium or an iodine, for instance, has the third highest cesium levels of all testing locations throughout Japan, which is there's numbers at around 29 million per kilogram. Hospital refuses to treat the plant workers. Imagine that. The heroes. Now, imagine this was a nuclear scientist working at Fukushima. Would the hospital refuse him or her? 80% of residents tested of radioactive iodine of 87,000 microsieverts in their thyroids, which means they're producing, that gets converted into radioactive hormones. And it can't just be 80%. And it can't just be iodine. Again, iodine is used to downplay you and deceive you and lead you away from uranium, lead you away from plutonium, lead you away from the biggest byproduct, which is curium, which, by the way, is lethal to all species in all the experiments. 50% of children's thyroids at 35,000 microsieverts. These are catastrophic numbers. This is supposed to be measured in atomic decays, and 35,000 microsieverts. I think you basically got to multiply it by 150 per microsievert. Just let me break out the calculator for you. Now, it's much worse because we're only talking about gamma. We're not talking about all the other emitters. Times 150 atoms, which is 5.2 million atoms in the thyroid, which is getting converted. Now, you can put 2 million atoms on the head of a needle, but you can't see it. But the amount of energy we're talking about and the amount of damage we're talking about is catastrophic numbers. Just a single atom can manifest into a tumor 10, 20, 30 years down the road. Your body attacks it every second for the rest of your life. So what happens with 35,000 microsieverts or 5.2 million atoms? Okay, I just wanted to come out and bash my brains. So you want to really appreciate how evil this actual industry is. The nuclear industry in Canada is incredibly diabolical. On June the 14th, 93 days after the meltdown started, 55 countries 55 countries banned food from 14 prefectures. All of those prefectures, not just Fukushima, for over a decade. Canada lifted all restrictions within 93 days. So Japan couldn't, they never stopped growing the food. They couldn't ship it anywhere, only Canada. And Canada now is one great big disease factory. And just going to the shop, I dread going to a supermarket because they have shipped food in nonstop. This shows you unequivocal that the industry is absurdly out of control, diabolically out of control, dangerously is a danger to all species now. They're completely out of control. And to ship people back into a community where 20% of it is considered okay, acceptable to murder people in. And you can't cross the street, you can't go up the road, you can't go down the road, you can't go out in your garden. I just wish the planet would come to its senses and say, hey, this is too much. You guys are insane. And one of the most important subjects on the planet, we got 10, 11 viewers. We got a lousy 15 likes with 900 new subscribers. I'm completely censored. The truth is so terrible. I mean, the truth is the best thing that humanity can have, I thought. The industry is so insane, they actually censor me and watch me 24/7. And I know that might sound paranoid to you, but we actually have the documentation. This is what they're up to. They don't have any resistance. And anybody who watches the video is put on a watch list, no doubt. So should people go back to a town where 80% is too radioactive to live? And the right answer, of course, was no. And 16 wonderful people acknowledged that, and we thank you for it. I'll probably be back tomorrow with another one. The industry's insane. And I really would love to have a couple of days off, but what's the point? I shouldn't take it. I don't deserve to take a day off because of the danger that everybody's into. So thank you for finding me, Albert and Dana and Asana. Thank you again. Don Vincent, Port Angeles, Susie too. I'm just going up through the comments. Colette, again, thank you, Colette. And James Lucid, hi, James. Did I miss anybody? Looks like I got everybody. See, there's no way I'm going to be able to sleep tonight after seeing this. That's the problem. Again, this is traumatizing that they're so incredibly evil. Yeah, Timeless, thank you. Jeffrey Brown, hi Jeffrey. Jeffrey's on the highway usually. No insects on his windshield. He usually reports in. Okay, so thank you everybody. Again, I'll apologize for not winning, not being able to do enough, not being able to fight back enough. I'm doing the best I can. I never stop. All I want is the world to have a future. I want you to have a future. I want your friends and your families and your loved ones to be able to eat without being poisoned. And I know that sounds like a crime, but somebody has to do it, right? Appreciate everybody for finding me. Hugs for you, your friends, your families, and your loved ones. Please share this and like the video. Please remember to put me in your bookmarks so you can find me, because YouTube will unsubscribe you. Colette says she's proud to be on the list. God bless you, sweetie. Good night, everybody. God bless, and have a great night. Yeah, thank you, Darlene. Good night, folks.